considerable professional experience and a personal passion for the theatre. So why are you involved in stop motion?
I think the link is performing. My puppets perform. The fact that they perform in usually theatrical settings, I'm sort of getting defensive here, really, because certainly a lot of animators I work with would never go to the theatre, and they say, "Oh, but you like theatre," as though it's something bad. I think my theatrical style initially came from economy, because I couldn't afford big sets or hundreds of puppets. Actually, do we need hundreds of puppets? Why not make one puppet perform them? And I love theatre tricks, I love illusion, and animation is an illusion to begin with. And I love transformations, and I always say animation isn't just about the puppet, it's about how you use lighting and staging, and it's all about presentation. It's consciously enjoying the storytelling. I think that's what it is, and that's, all my films enjoy lighting tricks and presentation, and it's a puppet on if not a stage, it's a fluid space like theatre is. And I like the liberation that theatre allows in terms of colours, the tricks it allows, and I bring that sort of liberation to my animation, I think. Yeah. And I love theatre, I love opera, I love ballet, I love music and things. And I don't like to think animation is separate from all that. I want animators to go to the theatre. I find that very frustrating. They don't go.
Have you ever been involved in traditional puppetry?
Sometimes in my theatre stuff. I did a production of Turn of the Screw. I had to work with real children, and they just ran with it, really. And the fact that they had a puppet, they felt they could do anything. And at the end, the boy had to rip the head off the character who became a ghost in the story. And the relish with which he twisted this head and just pulled it off, he'd seen some terrible things, that character. But it was interesting that he was freer to do it through a puppet than through words or anything. And the audience just squirmed as he ripped this head off, and this 10-year-old boy doing something terrible. But it was a puppet, and, you can get away with anything with a puppet. Yeah.
A question that's often asked of stop-motion artists by traditional puppeteers is, how do you maintain that immediacy of the performance? How do you keep the puppet alive?
I guess of all the animation forms, stop-motion is spontaneous, but it's spontaneous over 12 seconds a day. It's the only form of animation that you start at frame 0 and finish at frame 250. And you can plot it. The plot that has to come out in that scene, the emotion that has to come out of the scene, but you still get to the point where you've got a character raising its arm, and you think, the hand's in the shadow, so I've got to just adjust the arm to get it into the light, and you hadn't planned that, and maybe it's thrown out the composition, so you have to adjust the composition, or maybe you've taken a step too far forward and it's losing the focus, and you can't think, it's taken me 6 hours, I can't stop. So you sort of, you adjust to your surroundings. It is spontaneous within parameters that the director or the storyboard has set. But back to your question, people say, God, you need patience. Yeah, get over it. That's the job.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
And do you think you're still following a feeling through it?
Yes.
There's still that element of performance.
Yes. What's interesting when you're working on a TV series, which I've done dozens of TV series, it's very fragmented. I directed a series called Toby's Travelling Circus, and any one day an animator could be spread over 6 episodes. So we have to make sure the storyboard is very clear. So an animator says, why am I holding this ball? Because he may not have received the ball in the scene. That might have been another scene. So you have to be able to tell the animator, right, well, Mum gave you that ball in the previous scene and you're very proud of it. Okay. So your job as a director is to think in the broadest sense of the story. The animator's just focused on that 10 seconds, but you have to tell him what the emotion is. And so, it sort of got to the point in Toby's Travelling Circus where I had something like 26 episodes in my head in various stages of writing, recording, storyboarding, camera scripting, shooting, and post-production. And it does, if an animator says, "Barry, shot 28, okay, it's there, yep, it's there, yes." But I love it, the brain does overdose a bit, but so your job as a director in a TV series is to have the overall picture, because the animator is so focused on those 10 seconds in that day. Yeah.
And is it better to assign an animator to a character so that there's a continuation or there's a development?
Right, okay, that's a really good question. On Wind in the Willows, which is showing my age, but that was 6 years of my life, we did assign animators to the characters. We had 2 animators per shot, and we split the characters between 2 animators. I was Toad and Ratty and whoever else. And sometimes you'd have a scene between Toad and Ratty, and that's great because I was doing the other character. But if you had a scene between Toad and Mole, unless you really talked about it, when are you raising your arm? Don't rush me! Okay, well, I'm reaching out for you. Are you going to, unless you really communicate, it doesn't work. So, to get the consistency of character, you have to have a good animation director who will say, Toad will do this, but he wouldn't do that. So, if another animator comes on, you have a lexicon of movements and things. But how we work now on a TV series, we try and give animators a scene, so they have a complete sort of story within a scene. So, and if you cut to another location, you don't notice any differences quite so much. But it does mean, one morning you might just have a close-up, then you might have, 20 characters or so. But you have to establish the lexicon of movement from how a character will behave at the beginning. Yeah.
With regard to your own personal short films, your characters tend to be realistic representations of human beings.
Yes, I was waiting for this question.
Who express quite highly naturalistic movement, which can be very complex and subtle.
Take slight issue there. No, I wouldn't use the word realistic. I'll use the word credible, but I would also say, no, it's a bit more like dance, because Tchaikovsky doesn't speak. He doesn't have a mouth movement at all. It's just in the eyes. So it's all body language, which isn't realistic. And he's in a picture frame, which isn't realistic. And the set is inside, outside, using light, which isn't realistic. But I get this a lot. Achilles, people turn their nose up and say, oh, it's very realistic. No, it's got 2 stone statues having sex in front of a Greek chorus on a stone plinth suspended in space with a spotlight. I'm sorry, I haven't found that in my life. I think, I said earlier, animation is about characters, but it's also about how you light, how you design, how you costume, how you use sound. None of the characters in my own films tend to speak naturalistic dialogue. It's either sung or a voiceover. So I do use figurative things. My film Rigoletto, I thought, would it be interesting to do them as animals? But then I think, no, we're talking really complex emotions. And I'm sure I could have done it, but I like the dark emotions. But I think why I use animation is in the way of telling the story. And Tchaikovsky, he sort of danced, he sort of conducted, and he sort of played the piano. A quick story. I wanted a piano. It cost a lot to make a miniature piano. And I thought, well, if I have it, I've got to have the keys. And he's got to sit down, which is going to be limiting because I want him to dance and whatever. So the piano's going to get in the way. Do I need a piano? I can't afford it anyway. No, so the piano went, and the story became sort of in his head, and it was quite easy for him to go from playing an imaginary piano to conducting to sort of Swan Lake-ish. And that movement is not realistic at all, but it was freed by not having a literal piano, I think. So I wouldn't say I'm realistic. I'm figurative. I like figures. And they're credible. You can see the thought process. But they're not realistic, no.
So theatre and live performance
Yes.
is a regular ongoing feature in your short
Yes.
films. And even where film conventions are used, I often get a very real sense that I could be watching the theatre as a recorded live performance, and maybe that's why I've said realistic before.
Yes.
There's that
I think
connection.
What is unusual about my films is they happen in real time. And you think you could be watching a live performance, but actually there are quite a few tricks going on that in screenplay you mentioned. Things are revealed behind the screens that character was there, but hang on, he was there 2 frames ago. And it's more about a fluid space, I think. I like to use conventions. Achilles, I set myself the convention of they're just going to have sticks and shields. That's how they can tell the story. I did a film about Gilbert and Sullivan, and the convention there was a bed. That was all I had, and everything came from the bed. And it comes from economy, but also it sort of inspires you. The Shakespeare film, I had very lofty ambitions for that film. Big sets, hundreds of characters, and the budget, which was a good budget, but it only allowed for one decent puppet. And I thought, okay, I'm going to make it about Shakespeare. It's going to be about Shakespeare himself auditioning the complete works of Shakespeare. And how much can I get out of one puppet? And again, it's this performance thing. Using the puppet's body. Bloom is unusual in that you don't need to know there's no cultural references. But it is literally a naked puppet in a pool of light. And it is so powerful. And I thought the challenge was to tell this really complex story. And it's very dark, emotionally. There's no set, no costume, no cultural references, no dialogue. It's just a puppet in a pool of light, and people are absolutely shocked by the film. And I think that's what it's about. Yeah. It is about the puppet.
Yeah. So having a singular puppet, is that, because that's a recurring.
Yes, well, that's economy.
Well, I was going to say it's budget, but
yes,
it's also a focus, isn't
it? Yes, but it's a budget thing that I've run with. I quite like it. I like the Tchaikovsky film was the smallest budget I've ever worked with. It's tiny, but it doesn't look it.
No, it doesn't. No.
And I thought, how do I bring in Madame von Meck, when she's an important part of the story, but in the film she can only have 30 seconds or 90 seconds, whatever. But I can't afford to build her for 30 seconds. So, well, let's just have an image of her. Yes, photography was just happening as Tchaikovsky was around, and we do have some photos of Tchaikovsky. So let's use that as a device to bring the other characters in. And I could bring many more characters in like that. So I do like restraints because it makes you creative, I think. And I'm sort of working on a feature film which has the same idea of theatrical economy. I wish people didn't see the word theatrical as a criticism, which is, I get a lot of the time, really. Let's change that. Let's call it the art of artifice, celebration of the non-literal, I think. It's the idea of liberating sound, music, so that everything is there to tell the story. If it doesn't tell the story, lose it. You know, going back to Shakespeare, how wonderful Shakespeare was. You know, the idea at the Globe that a teenage boy could come on with a candle playing Lady Macbeth and say, "It's night," and the audience got it. You know, it was daylight, and they were making rowdy noises, and he was a boy talking about sex, losing children and madness and everything. So how does that work? Well, they set up the convention at the beginning of the show, you know, that you know it's an actor, you know it's artifice. Get over it. That's how it works. It's called theatre. It's called artifice. You know, and opera is a celebration of artifice. Ballet is a celebration. Puppetry is a celebration of artifice. It's, to sum it up, I think, Oscar Wilde, give a man a mask and he'll tell you the truth. By having this artifice, you can be much more truthful, much more honest. And I think that's what puppetry does so well, because it's removed and they only do what matters, the truthful stuff.